Now, let's talk about one of the big reasons for sort of hostile, difficult cases: advocates. I toyed with the idea of having an advocate join us today, and to be honest with you, I kind of lost track of it. I work with a pretty good advocate. His heart's in the right place. He's not aggressive or hostile, and any time that I have seen a district have to do something they didn't want to do, it was really something they should have done. But in the state of California, what does it take to be an advocate? Nothing. There is no training requirement. There's no experience requirement. You just have to call yourself an advocate. Now, California CDE, California Department of Education, is having a little trouble with the word advocate because attorneys use the word advocate. You might see that the parent has a non-attorney representative. That's an advocate. They're starting to call them non-attorney representative. What is that? NAR, non-attorney representative. I have also seen advocates be called friends of the family, friend of the parent, friend of the student. But an advocate has, there's no level of competency required, no tests they have to take, no forms they have to fill out. They're just an advocate. An advocate and an attorney, the first thing they will do when they come into a case, day number one, they're going to look at your report and they're going to request an independent educational evaluation. And there's nothing the district can do to deny that. That's going to happen automatically. It doesn't even matter, and in fact, I'm engaged in one right now where the parent is like, the last assessment the district did was spot on, and I'm like, okay, what is it that you want an IE for? What can I help you on? She goes, nothing. The lawyer requested it. So that's good. I don't have to do a lot of work, and I won't charge the district my full amount. But it's just a matter of principle, a matter of procedure. That's what they're going to do. You're going to notice a wide range of a discrepancy of knowledge between your advocates. And chances are, every advocate will know a part of the law in a lot more detail than you do. So it's not always best to argue with them. In fact, it's never best to argue with them. Now, worked with an advocate one time who would sit at the table and quote the law, but reference the code as well. So he'd say, under IDA Section 3, Paragraph 4, subsection A, the law requires da 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 da. And you don't have the law there in front of you, and even if you did, I mean, it's pages long. How would you verify that? But it looked impressive, and it sounded impressive. And he even referenced those codes when he filed with the state for fair hearing. And our attorney looked up those codes, and every one of them was wrong. He was making them up as he went along. Some of them referred to, they were, you know, because of the way the law is laid out, they were all in Ed code. But some would be under lunchroom procedures for, you know, washing your hands. And he's quoting that to say we didn't meet our 60-day timeline. So anyway, that was just his little stint. One of the most powerful weapon that advocates have and that the districts have is to put things in writing. So let's say an advocate wants to request a therapist, an occupational therapist assessment, an OT assessment. The district has the option at the IEP meeting to say yes, and the IEP team agrees and do an OT assessment. But is the district going to turn them down? Well, let's do this. Okay, if the district's going to say no, then what the district will do is respond to that request with a prior written notice. So that means that the decision is not left up to the IEP team. The IEP meeting will close. The district will have, I want to say it's 15 days, to do a prior written notice to provide their answer to the advocate and parent. If a district's going to say no, that's the best way to do it, because they're going to document their reasons. And it's going to be in writing. And it's going to be evidence in court. Now, if at the IEP meeting, the IEP team says no, a good advocate will say, I want a prior written notice rejecting our request for occupational therapy evaluation. And if the district doesn't have a rock solid case, they will overrule the IEP team and provide that OT assessment. So it really works both directions, depending on how strong the evidence is. But regardless of your advocate's area of knowledge or their hostility or their niceness, they're there for a reason. Somewhere along the line, the parent got upset. The parent got upset and something wasn't said right, something wasn't done right, and the advocate convinced them that they needed to come on board. Most districts, almost all districts, especially in Southern California, will not pay advocate fees unless the case actually goes to fair hearing and the judge awards the advocate some money. So these parents are dishing out of their own pocket money for the advocate. I've seen advocates run $150 an hour. And when I say an hour, I mean every time they're in their office making a phone call on behalf of the parent, they're charging the parent at least a percentage of that hourly rate. So these are parents who are desperate that something went wrong. So never just ignore an advocate. There's a reason somebody did something wrong to bring the advocate in. So we talked about why there would be an advocate there. Once an advocate is involved, they become that case becomes your top priority. That case is the one you work on now. That case is the one that starting today, you start scanning in those documents and doing your records review. You start interviewing your teachers. You start reaching out to the parent. Now the advocate has told the parent, you can't talk to the school district. Well, the advocate can't make the parent not talk to you. And if the parent refuses to talk to you, just notate that. I wouldn't go calling the advocate, but you could. You can call the advocate. I wouldn't try to get input about the student from the advocate, but you could definitely have the advocate explain to you where the breakdown is, what the issues are. Get to know the student, get to know their learning style, their strengths, their likes, their hobbies. Be able to talk about the student in the meeting in a very positive way, but also to address their challenges. Assume there's precipitating factors that cause the advocate to have to get involved. Assume somebody has pissed off the parent, something has gone wrong, and it may not be somebody, it may just be the parent is so frustrated with the kid failing that they have given up on the school system taking the initiative. And so they're going to bring in a friend of the family. And it could really be a friend of the family. Try to talk to the parent directly. And yes, you can. Even if the advocate says you can't. Listen, obviously, empathetically. And as you know how to listen. You've been trained how to listen. You've been trained how to paraphrase. Just remember, when you paraphrase something back, you have to paraphrase not only what they said, putting it into your own words, but the feeling that you saw in them when they said it. Or the feeling that you heard if it's a phone interview. Boy, I can tell when you were talking about Johnny's math class, it's like the intensity of your conversation just went really high. You're really frustrated with that math class. And probably that teacher, aren't you? Now they know you understand. And now they'll talk to you. Now the advocate's going to throw you under the bus as the school psychologist. There's nobody at that table that will be presumed to have more knowledge about interventions and accommodations and student success than the school psychologist, right or wrong. That assumption is going to be made. So you can't take it personally when the advocate tells you what a lousy job you did on that last psycho ed and how in the world you could allow these accommodations to go in place, knowing full well, as you knew full well, that they would not work. And you just take a deep breath and realize everybody at the table has been through this before, or most of the time. Most of the time, your director will have been through a meeting like this before. And as a director myself, I can tell you, we do not take advocate evaluations of school psychologists and SAI teachers seriously. We take it with a grain of salt. It's their job to be angry. It's their job to point out failures. It's their job to expect unrealistic expectations. In my book, I put this in there. I will start out each advocate case, represented case, the same way, and wait for the day the parent says, I am so glad we had this talk. I'm going to call the advocate right now and tell him he's fired. I'm perfectly happy with the school psychologist. Guys, it has never happened. I call the parents, I listen, I paraphrase back. We have these wonderful meetings, but I've never heard a parent say that. And usually when the parent fires the advocates, what really happens is the parent runs out of money and stops returning the phone calls from the advocate. That's the only way I've seen them get out of the picture. Once they get into the picture, they stay in. Okay, preparation for your meeting. If you know there's an advocate involved, you know there's an attorney involved, you know it's a difficult case, send those drafts out. Now, what if you haven't gotten parent input and everything else about the psycho ed is written? Like we discussed a while ago, do it, but go ahead and send that draft to the parent. Let the parent see that the only thing missing is their input. Go ahead and send it out. When you show up to the meeting, make sure that everyone has plenty of copies of everything. If the teacher's going to reference a work sample, there better be 7 copies of that work sample if there's going to be 6 people at that meeting. Everything you have plenty of copies of. And you're going to want to use and stick to an agenda. There's a couple of good agendas out there. I've got some on my website, but they're all basically the same thing. Stick to it. The advocate will try to derail it. The advocate's job is to keep everything focused on what the child is not able to do and what the school is not doing. And so a good agenda will have a parking lot. In fact, I think we're going to talk about this later on, but in case not, a parking lot is a place where you put those topics that the advocate brings up or the attorney brings up or the parent brings up that we're not ready to talk about in the agenda yet. So you make a note about it, you put it in the parking lot, and you get to it later on. Or you don't ever get to it because the meeting has moved on and progressed and that's no longer an issue. But that's a good trick to stay on top of, to keep the agenda going. You know, I have Googled advocates in the past, looked up their names. I don't go to their website because that's just going to be propaganda. But news articles about an advocate can be informative sometimes. It's not a lot of help. It might give you some indication as to what you're in for. And sometimes it can be humorous and you can have a little note card that reminds you about some funny or you know, unfortunate, I don't know, something you read in the news. That's okay. If you want to do that, that's fine. I've never found it to be much help. You should, though, pre-brief your IEP team. So if you have worked with this advocate before, or you know a colleague who's worked with them before, now talk to that colleague. Find out how it went. Find out what they're looking for. Find out the advocate's area of strength or knowledge in the IEP law. What are they going to focus on? And I was working with advocates, not too long ago. What was it he brought up? Something that was in the law that I had no idea until I went back and looked it up. Let's see if it comes to me in a minute. But anyway, the main thing you want to talk to your team about is what not to say. Right? We talked about not using the word lazy or unmotivated. So talk to them about describing the behavior, not labeling it. Ask your teachers, if they're asked by an advocate, do you think Johnny needs a one-on-one in your classroom? How does a teacher answer that question? Without saying, at best, your teacher's going to say, a one-on-one would help any student in that classroom. Do know that if a teacher says something like that, if a teacher says, if an advocate asks, does Jill need a one-on-one in your classroom, and the teacher says, heck yeah, I've never known a student who needed a one-on-one more than Jill needed it. That's going to be hard to walk back from, but it's not a commitment of services by the district. If the teacher says, I really think Jill needs to go to the doctor and have an MRI done, you may have heard the rumor that means now the district has to pay for it, and that's just not true. Teachers and parents and administrators, let me roll that back a little bit. Teachers and parents and psychologists, the janitorial staff, if you have them at the meeting, the front office secretary, if you have him or her at the meeting, they can say anything they want to. If it's not a part of the offer of FAPE, the school's not mandated to provide it.